Midway is the punk rock, you know, they're like the Ramones or the Sex Pistols of the video game industry. The guys who are like, oh, this is how you think that we should do it. These are the rules that you think we should obey. Well, what if we go the other way?
What was the culture of Midway in the 90s? And my take on it was aggressive.
It's pushing the boundaries of maybe good taste.
I don't think that there's a single gamer that exists that never played a Midway game.
They were the only company in a lot of ways that could make a fantastic sports game that anyone could pick up and play.
It looked so real to me that I was like, Boop, you just killed me.
I remember thinking to myself, wow, I'm working with gods.
They made great games, and at one point, we led the world.
I call it like the Big Bang of the video game universe. I mean, we went from blank screens to very rudimentary games like Pong to all of a sudden, you know, we've got Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong. You know, we came out with Defender.
Within months of appearing on the market in 1981, his game Defender shot to the top and stayed there. For Williams, the company that owned it, his idea was worth $100 million.
Well, it's sort of the ultimate fantasy where you are the only force left between evil and good.
You go into a place, I mean, there'd be 8 defenders. People would be standing in line, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 deep. It was the golden era. But, you know, then we got to 84. All this great stuff got kind of buried under just like this stinking pile of like shitty clones and, you know, 6-week Atari 2600 ports.
Anything was selling at the time as far as the whole market was concerned. And people started just shoving garbage out the door. And at some point in time, the customer got fed up with the thing.
This year's hit is next year's firewood. And
it's that tough, this business.
It is. I mean, 3 years from now, you'll ask somebody what Defender was, and they'll go, I don't know.
The consumer got disenchanted with what was going on with, I think, the consumer product. It affected how things were going on in the arcades and how the game's earnings went down, and we did backtrack.
The whole video game crash was just kind of like, wow, man, this is game over. And went back to school for a couple of years in California, and but you know, I just couldn't get the video game thing out of my head, and I'm like, so I was like, yeah, man, we got to do a new game, you know, get the band back together. So back to working at what was known as Williams.
I just remember him, before he started doing anything, coming to New York when I was still in New York, talking about the idea of doing another video game.
Eugene came in and wasn't really prepared, but he knew in his mind what he wanted to do. And he wrote down on a big piece of paper, N-A-R-C. He held up the piece of paper and it says Narc. And they said, what's Narc?
Guy, you know, protecting the world from this scourge of drugs and pushers and drug dealers. I felt like video games was always in some kind of fantasy world. You know, it was always like, oh, you know, we're men in tights, we're, you know, running around with swords and casting spells on people and spears and stuff. I'm like, why can't a video game be about something real? We wanted to make an impression to the world that Williams was back.
My job was in field service, like I answered the 800 number. And I would badger the programmers at night to understand what they did. So then I would go to college and I would try to find classes that like somehow matched what these guys knew, because I wanted to know what that was. My goal was to program a game, and there's no way you could learn. You just had to do it on your own.
You think about the casualness of this era. You're kind of like putting together a team, and like, man, I need like a programmer for this game. And then you talk to a couple people, and here's some kid, just got out of college. I think he's still trying to finish the last couple courses.
I'm going to be in. I did visualize that as the opportunity, the video game opportunity of a lifetime for me. I mean, if Eugene's starting video and I'm not on the ground floor, I mean, if I wait 6 months to go do summer school or whatever, I'm going to miss something.
Jack Hager was really the lead artist and then the kind of the art director.
Jack has a great history where he went on to be one of the founders of the Amiga.
What more can you say? When we started, I guess there wasn't a clear sense of what we were going to do. It was more, let's develop the hardware and the software.
I always thought with video games, when you make them, somebody would come with this great, like this book. Here it is, this is what we're gonna make, and we start page 1 and we start making it. It was never like that. It was like, so what do you guys want to do?
At the time, the Japanese games had they had this animation down. I mean, they had just armies of incredibly talented artists. How could you compete?
I started playing with video digitization. That became a huge thing for me during my career. The idea of taking actual images, video images, and getting them into a video game, that was kind of revolutionary.
The only thing that had happened like this prior was a game called Journey. They actually like digitized the heads of 5 frames of the band members, and they would like go.
We bought a treadmill that we were able to take the top off because I realized we would have to film people walking in place and teaching actors how to be a video game character. And to my mind, nobody had done that up to that point.
Jack Hager approached me one day and said, hey, Mark, I got this concept for this character. I think you'd be perfect for it.
I came up with that character basically from the old Ironsides TV show with Raymond Burr in a wheelchair. And the wheelchair was mounted with guns, of course.
It really was at the time just another day. I don't think it hit me till decades later that, oh my gosh, my image is still in there. I have daughters now. They're going to see this.
I did have a question. At that point, we had filmed a few characters. We had filmed the environments. And I asked, okay, a rocket launcher is one of your weapons now. And I said, okay, when a player fires the rocket launcher, what happens? And people said, what do you mean? I go, well, I can make it look real. These are real people. The mission was to, make it look real.
The body parts would fly. I mean, I guess this was one of the first, body part games. I think maybe the first.
I remember like George was like, God, this is so cool. I can't believe this is so cool. And I came up and I was really being very gentle about it. I just said, I mean, it is cool, but do you think that's a good thing to put in an arcade where little kids are there?
You have to understand, arcades at that point were still very democratic environments. Any family, any age could walk in without concern.
And this escalated into a huge argument. I just remember it was a huge, huge screaming match. And all I'm saying is, I'm just saying we should think about it. I'm not trying to limit your creativity. I'm not trying to censor you.
I think too, with a game that involved realistic content, when we crossed that bridge of digitizing life, the game was no longer an escape.
I remember actually a member of the board of directors of Williams called the game a surrealistic nightmare. And he was really concerned that there might be some, negative ramifications from releasing this game to the public and felt that the game should be canceled.
With the coin-op business, you're selling that game a quarter at a time. With the home business, once you sell the cartridge, if it was back in the old days, it was a cartridge that fit into a Sega, fit into a Nintendo. and it was a crappy game, okay, you made your money. Coin-op, it was 1 quarter at a time. And if that game sucked, the second quarter, or the third quarter, the fourth quarter wouldn't happen. And in our case, we wouldn't even get out of the test phase.
We had this magic number of like $700. Like, you know, I don't know how that number came up, but we wanted to earn $700 in a week. That would be, if we could do that, you know, we felt like we've got something.
So we put it out there. I remember, actually, I think we actually had some champagne, you know, like drinking champagne in this high school arcade.
I remember the first 2 guys that played it, they were literally drug dealers. It was like, these guys walk in, I'm like, these are some bad characters. And they're like, oh, check this out, you know? And they start playing it.
The cool thing was the kids really dug the game, you know, and just this whole new world of kind of like reality. No one had seen anything like that in a video game before.
Even with all the problems in the software and stuff, I think the first week it earned like $742. And we're like, we've done it. We are successful. Yeah, that was the first time that we actually started like going, maybe, you know, maybe there's something here. And that's when we got confident enough to actually make a plan to sell it. You know, like, I think then management all of a sudden, you know, they all of a sudden actually goes, well, maybe we should order some parts for this game, and maybe we should actually plan to build this game at some point.
I don't know if they thought about canceling the game, but it made so much money, I think that thought kind of quickly vanished.
The new game is called Narc. It's manufactured by a company in Chicago, by Williams Electronics, and it's currently the #1 video arcade game in the country.
People were talking about this game that was extremely violent and people could explode and all that sort of stuff, but it was okay because they were drug dealers.
For some players, the carnage is part of the appeal.
I love the gore and the blood and the guts spilling everywhere. And when you hit people, they go flying through the air and their heads smash on the pavement. It's really cool.
Still had at this time Pac-Man sitting next to it and things like Donkey Kong, and now here's Narc with like fast sports cars, drug dealers trying to like take you down, and body parts flying everywhere, and it looked like a movie.
I'm sure there were cops who went and played Narc to like live out their fantasies of what they wish they could do as a cop. You know, they're in real life, they're handing out speeding tickets and reading people Miranda. There's no Miranda rights in Narc. Nobody has any rights except to die. Like, you have the right to remain silent forever.
We weren't aware of the changing groundswell and the appetite for aggressive or realistic types of games were, and what Narc brought to that evolution.
One of the things that Williams was so successful at doing was hiring very creative, dynamic designers. But in order to do that, creative people have a tendency sometimes to be kind of off the wall situation. But we tried to bring those people in because we knew that they could design the most successful games.
Ken goes, oh, I want you to meet this guy. He's flying in. His name's Mark Trammell, and he's coming from California. And here comes this larger-than-life dude, tall, big, like, perm blonde hair.
Well, it's funny, the interview process in Chicago was a little bit crazy because, you know, I was kind of Mr. California. I had kind of long hair, and, you know, I think I came in there with some white pants on and a blue vest and, you know, kind of looking funny.
They did not want to hire Mark, and we said, no, we're hiring Mark, whether you like it or not.
We're going, wow, this is a big mistake, you know, and, but, you know, actually, he turned out to be one of the most brilliant designers we ever had.
Even when I interviewed, I said I wanted to revive the dual joystick mechanic. The dual joystick mechanic of Robotron is, it's one of my favorites.
The crazy thing about Robotron, I remember when we came up with that dual stick control thing, and we felt like, okay, this is like going to be the new standard. Every video game from now on will have this, and no one copied it.
Robotron, when I think about that, it's sensory overload. There's so many, you know, rainbow of colors coming at you and the sound effects. And so I was kind of in that vein of trying to duplicate that experience. And so we started kind of plugging away at the game, and it only took maybe a couple of weeks before I realized this John Tobias guy was just a rock star.
You know, the first game I worked on was Smash TV. The funny thing about it was I always looked at it as temporary. Like, I thought, I'm going to do this for a while, I'm going to save my money, and I'm either going to draw comic books or I'm going to CalArts.
A big film at the time, of course, was Running Man. RoboCop was in that same era. We just had the idea to take these characters and turn them into a game show.
I'd buy that for $1.
This consumerism gone crazy, futuristic world, you know, where, you know, a toaster is more important than human life.
You know, Eugene was the king. You know, we would all go to him for advice.
We were just starting the Boss Monster, which I guess was Mutoid Man. And we reached the point where you blew off his head.
And so I remember creating the little blood spatters and watching the characters on screen kind of explode. I remember the first time I had done it, I kind of minimized the impact because I thought, oh, that's looking pretty gory, and I dialed it back.
I think John was opposed to just how many bloody chunks I put on the screen.
Everybody goes, oh, that's amazing, that's awesome, you know. And I was going, yeah, it's all right, you know, like, and I go, you know, multiply that by 100, you know. and so
they pushed, you know, hey, more blood, more blood.
This boiling fountain of blood, you know, and it was just like, that's gonna get people's attention. I mean, but it almost looked so alive, you know, just like this cauldron of just boiling blood.
He said, now, you know what a game is? I said, no. He said, a game is 100 of those fucking cool things, and now you have one. And he walked out of my office. So I was like, okay, well, I'm on the right track.
In terms of how the games did earn money, we'd call that percentaging, and that was largely up to the game designer to pay attention to moments in the game where you might want to lock down a player and you might want to give them a greater challenge.
We wanted to crush the player, and if you're like crushed by some little guy, or you know, you get shot in the back by, you know, a ant or something, I mean, it's like, wait a minute, that's not fair. You know, that guy couldn't have killed me. That guy's a wimp. But if it's some monstrous guy that's 30 feet tall, you know, on like tank treads, running around, and he kills you, it's like, well, you know, the dude was badass. I mean, that's a badass dude. You know, obviously he's gonna kill me a few times before I figure out how to do it. You accepted it. You accepted your death and gladly paid for more.
Arcade games were built around, you play for this chunk of time and then you give us another quarter. It's like, oh man, I was hoodwinked for decades. Like, people complain about mobile game microtransactions, but arcade games were doing that decades before that in way more nefarious ways.
Back when you go back to the pinball days, you know, in the 60s and 70s and all that other stuff, you had basically three major pinball companies. You had Gottlieb, you had Bally, and you had Williams.
Everybody at Bally Midway had been looking at Williams for years as them. They were the other guys. They did these type of games and required enormous skill, and I did games that were idiot-proof and silly and funny.
So we really wanted to bury those guys. You know, we wanted to bury Bally Midway. We felt that they relied on licensing brands too much. So, you know, so we just felt they were, you know, phonies and incompetents, and we were going to teach them a lesson, you know.
And they were them, and we were us, and all of a sudden now, they were buying us.
They were diversifying into health clubs and casinos. They decided to get out of the coin-op industry, so it became available for us to buy, and that's why we wound up purchasing them. Yeah, we won the war. You know, we killed these guys, and then the crazy thing is, then like we hired all their managers, and they became our managers. and then it was, I don't know, it wasn't a year or two before. We had our name changed to Midway. We won this war. We're Williams. You know, why are we becoming Midway? I mean, they should Bally Midway be becoming Williams. And he goes, you know what? I paid $5 million for that fucking name. We're gonna use it. It's like the only people that we were able to actually attract was Brian Cullen and Jeff Nauman, who had done Rampage and Xenophobe prior to the acquisition, and then came over, and their first game with us was Arch Rivals, which was a big success at the time.
The income from Arch Rivals basically paid for the entire price of the merger. So really, it was a free deal. It was actually, Williams got Bally Midway for nothing.
I'll have to send you the waving goodbye photo. You'll appreciate it. It shows what people thought about the buyout.
I got a call on my phone rang, and it was Neil Nicastro, the CEO. He goes, hey, what would you think about doing a Terminator 2 game? And I was like, there's going to be a Terminator 2?
Arrangements were made for George and I to fly out to Hollywood to meet with Jim Cameron and his people and to show demonstrations of what our digitizing hardware and software was capable of.
We put on this videotape of us creating Narc, and Jim Cameron sees it, and he just freaks out. He's just like, this is awesome.
Cameron was great. I mean, it was like, you guys are making movies like we are.
And he just stands up at some point and he goes, give these guys everything they need. And we're like, Jack and I are like,
what was interesting to us when we made the Terminator 2 arcade game is I'm pretty sure it was the first movie that ever had on the set of the movie, shooting simultaneously to the movie, the arcade game.
We had access to all the actors and everything from the movie, but like Arnold, we didn't really have access to him. He was a little more expensive, more difficult, but we had access to his stunt double that we could use. And once he had a prosthetic jaw that he put on, and he could look exactly like Arnold.
Robert Patrick was so enthusiastic, he kept asking me, so it's going to look like me? And I said, yes, it's going to be you. We're going to digitize you. He goes, really? We're going to videotape you, and it's going to be you in the game. I think he was just as excited about that as he was about his role in the movie.
I think what's really fun about the arcade experience with peripherals is it kind of allows you to have a gaming experience that you might not be able to get in your house. Having that thing that you're holding in your hands makes it feel more like a performance.
That was like one of the most egregious quarter-second games too. Like you would get killed after 3 seconds and have to put it in, but the graphics, again, it was like graphics from the movie scanned in, so you're actually playing Arnold and fighting the T-1000, and there were elements from the movie, so it really felt like you were in the movies. But by the time you reached the end and defeated the T-1000, you had spent more than like it would cost to watch the movie 10 times.
See, when a game went on test, we all went out and kind of, we'd go watch it, have dinner, and come and watch it. And the game was killing people in literally people were lasting like 18 seconds. I remember John Tobias one time, he's like standing next to it, and we're watching it, and like these guys just got wasted. And he just turns around and he goes, that was 18 seconds. They died in 18 seconds, and it's like, he's yelling. I'm like, don't tell them they just lost their money. It was so funny.
T2 was a good success for Midway. It opened the door for a more cinematic experience.
It got Midway to a new level. It just all of a sudden it was like, this is what it means to sell a crap ton of games, and this is what it means to earn $1,000 a week, and just, it was just nonstop.
It's Judgment Day. So we released T2, and it was doing great. And I think this was around the holidays. As a matter of fact, I know it was New Year's Eve. And our marketing person called me at home and said, Jack, are you available on New Year's Day to come downtown to the studio and be interviewed by Entertainment Tonight? So I went down the next day, and there was a reporter there, and the game was there, and she was asking lots of questions about the development, like, how did you get Arnold into the game? And wow, that really looks like Robert Patrick, those sort of questions. And right in the middle of it was a question that was framed very different than any other question she had been asking me. So in the game, you are shooting police officers. How do you feel about that?
It's very clear in the movie that Arnold never kills anybody. He shoots them in the knee. And they fall over and they're no longer a threat. And that's exactly what happens in the game.
And I told her to stop right then. And I said, you need to convey my answer in its entirety because I felt very personal about this. And I said I had family members who were in the police force, so I took it very seriously.
And what it ended up being was kind of this real accusatory, hard-hitting, like, so how do you feel about making a video game that encourages people to shoot cops?
It was our first experience in how video games were directly impacting the entertainment community and through the media, society as a whole.
You know, in some ways, I think the old saying is that bad publicity is never really bad. It's publicity, and it gives you some notoriety and some attention, and maybe people that might not have been aware of the game before have now become aware of because of this free publicity. So it worked to our advantage ultimately.
In the early 80s, the games were metaphor. So it wasn't real spacemen, it was little metaphorical bleeps and, you know, little animated sprites that represented a human or an alien or a spaceship. The more you got into realism, definitely, I think, brought in more of the male aggressive game player.
The games are louder, the graphics are more detailed, there's lots more blood, like, you know, it feels different, and that's something that the companies are really actively advertising. Games have always been violent, so I'm not saying that comes out of nowhere, but it's not the thing that they were kind of leading with before, right?
I think everybody by this point knows the story about Mortal Kombat. It wasn't Mortal Kombat to start out with, and this is probably the greatest story of Midway. Ed Boon and John Tobias.
I think the first time I met him was he was playing his radio really loud in his office. He kept coming next door to us, you know, knocking on our door and coming in, sticking his head in and going, you know, hey, is that too loud? Sounds too loud. And he'd go back and lower his volume a little bit, and he'd come back, hey, is that too loud? And, you know, so that was the first time I met him. I think my first reaction was, who the fuck is this guy?
We had, I think, about a 3-month gap in the factory's production line, and they said, we can give you a game, and it was like some ridiculous period of time. It was like 6 months. Give you a game in 6 months to fill the gap. All right, what is it? It's a fighting game.
Karate Champ was a fighting game that I had played in high school, and I loved that game, and I thought, wow, that would lend itself to a sort of this one-on-one fighting game idea. I was a huge martial arts fan. You know, I loved old kung fu movies. In the early 90s, there were 2 up-and-coming martial arts stars. There was Van Damme, and then there was Steven Seagal. We thought, wow, we have to get one of those guys involved.
Not bad, kid.
And we're going to use Jean-Claude Van Damme's image in this game like we, you know, now have begun doing in our other video games. Okay.
We wanted him to come in to do some videos, you know, to digitize him and things like that, the voiceover and whatever. From what I remember is he just wasn't cooperative.
This was a filler game for us, you know, just something to fill the gap. And, excuse my language, okay? But I said, well, Kenny, tell him to go fuck off, okay? Tell these guys, make up their own characters and put their own characters in the game. Make a fighting game with their own characters. Okay, forget about Jean-Claude Van Damme.
I thought that was great. Like, I thought, you know, the freedom to sort of create our own story and our own characters and all those things was appealing. The first character we taped on Mortal Kombat was Johnny Cage.
I remember first showing up to the first day of shooting Mortal Kombat, showing up to film and literally having to spend an hour with John and Ed cleaning up an area for us to film because there was no room for us to film anything. When we taped the Johnny Cage character, I think we might have worked on the game for at least a month before we taped the second character. I think the idea was we wanted to kind of take our learnings on Johnny Cage and figure out really what it was that we were messing with. If a character threw a kick, you know, they'd want to throw it as fast as they could. And so the problem for us was it would become a blur. John is like, Bub, can't you float? Try to float. Hold yourself in the air because it's going to come out blurry. I was like, Bub, really?
And that was a learning process. You know, we didn't walk in with all the answers. It was just sort of, we would tape, you know, a character doing moves, and then we'd go back and work with the actual artwork. You know, Ed would start to work with the graphics in the game. You know, he would kind of come back with the reality of, well, we have to do that in, you know, 3 frames or 4 frames. You know, speed was super important to him.
And we go on our review, you know, we go look at the games, and it was early on that when we saw up on the screen, they had fighters fighting fast as hell. We said, holy shit, okay, this thing is great. And what was a 6-month production time to fill a hole in the factory, we threw that out the window and realized, continue where you're going because this thing is great.
It's just in obnoxious mode.
You have people out there that care about the lore of Mortal Kombat. You have people that can go through like, okay, well, this is Sub-Zero's brother, and he's not wearing the mask here, and this is original Sub-Zero, and then there's classic Sub-Zero. They can run all that stuff down because those characters have just become so iconic over the years. I mean, wrestling was stealing stuff from Mortal Kombat. Glacier, the wrestler, was just Sub-Zero.
You know, while I may, have created maybe the visual qualities of the characters, the backstory and whatnot, really the core of the product was, its playability. And that started with Ed. That always came from him sort of playing the game. And he would sit in his office for hours and, call people in to kind of, hey, try this, hey, try that. There was a period at the end of a match where you kind of got a free hit off of your opponent, and we wanted to kind of put an exclamation point on it. And for us, it was always, hey, watch me go do an uppercut. Somewhere along the way, Ed put in Johnny Cage punching off, the opponent's head.
I was like, you can't. I was like in shock. I was like, you can't do that. Holy cow! I was like, it looked so real to me that I was like, Boop, you just killed me. And he was like, yeah, isn't that really cool? And I was like, dude, you can't do that. And he goes, we can do whatever we want. And I was like, looked at him, I was like, you're right, we can, because no boss has ever I've never seen a boss hanging out with us. We could shoot whatever we want, and that's what they get.
He buried it in some button joystick combination that he thought no one would ever discover. I remember the players discovered it right away. Like it was the first weekend they discovered it. And we were there at some point watching the reactions.
Oh, everybody kind of, when they saw the fatalities. They knew this was something different.
We knew right then and there that there was no way we were going to ever take those out. And if anything, we need to give them more.
Back in the day, I had a little piece of paper that had all of the combos for the fatalities written down. I mean, obviously you have to memorize them at some point, but I would like whip that little cheat sheet out and like quickly type in all the buttons to make sure I got it.
They've got this game, Mortal Kombat, and you can kill people. And I was like, it's hard to even know what that even meant. But I'm like, all right, dude, well, we're gonna check this out. And sure enough, in the back of this skateboard shop, they had an MK machine. And I just took one look at it, was like, Johnny Cage. They are killing people.
It was like a big FU to everybody. Like, oh, you don't want us to make video games like this? Well, how about we turn it up to 11 and, just make them even worse than anything you can imagine. I'm sure they were all just, laughing heartily.
It's crazy to me how some people don't see the humor in Mortal Kombat. I mean, one of the taglines is toasty. What game does that? I think that humor was essential to its success because without it, I think it just would have been almost violent for the sake of being violent.
Seeing Mortal Kombat held up as a scapegoat for societal ills was a direct parallel to what rock and roll had gone through the 50s, through the 70s, what comic books had done in the 50s. It was the latest thing for the previous generation to blame society's problems on and say, these kids today, they're going to ruin the world.
Children of different ages, and that is exactly what...
Many companies would shudder when they see their product talked about in an unfavorable light by a U.S. senator.
The game narrator instructs the player to finish, and I quote, finish his opponent. The player may then choose a method of murder ranging from ripping a heart out to pulling off the head of the opponent with spinal cord attached.
I personally delighted in it because we saw a clear effect every time someone was making a big deal in the press about Mortal Kombat, and it was on TV. We saw the sales of the home product jump up, and if we happened to have something in the arcade, you know, it was probably also seeing the benefit of a jump.
Will you ever draw the line where you say it's too violent?
Yeah, there's of course we're going to draw the line.
Okay.
Certainly, yeah.
Scorpion wins. Fatality.
By the end of its production run, the first Mortal Kombat game, I believe, ended up selling about 27,000 units.
And I guarantee if you ask John and Ed separately, there's no way they had a vision that it was going to go the way it went. I mean, none of us did. None of us could imagine that you could sell that many games again in our era.
Being a nerd and being aspirational about the games industry in general from a young age, I knew some names. I knew Mark Cerny had created Marvel Madness. And I remember hearing these stories about a guy named Mark Turmel who had created Toy Bazaar for Activision.
Mark is one of the nation's leading designers of home video software, a former boy wonder who did not burn out, a creative computer whiz who at the dinosaur-like age of 23 is still cranking out video games for the home market. How many teenagers, after all, make it into People magazine and find themselves in other articles described as the hottest designer in the industry?
So when I recognized Mark Turmel's name in the credits of NBA Jam, that was a revelation. I know that guy. I don't know that guy, but I know that guy. I remember here, whatever happened to Mark Turmel? Oh, he's making one of the greatest arcade games of all time.
The rules of basketball are so perfect. You've got a three-point line, you've got timers for the shot clock, you've got periods that we could tighten up to be the right time frame. So just the inherent rules of basketball made for really a great product strategy. Neil Nicastro came into my office one day and he said, how come you're not pursuing the NBA license?
If they're the real basketball players, that's what the players are going to want to be. They're going to want to, they have their favorite basketball stars. They want to play as those basketball stars. That's what we have to do.
Made the pitch.
Williams Electronics is currently developing an arcade-based 4-player video basketball game, one which employs lifelike digitized graphics. First, basketball players are videotaped in a studio performing hundreds of moves. Artists digitize this footage into individual frames, which are stored and played back in sequence or animated to create a video basketball player capable of performing on command.
Well, the NBA's immediate reaction was, hey, thanks, but no thanks. Their kind of understanding or perception of the arcade business was rooted there in Times Square, which was a very seedy area at the time. And they did not want the NBA logo presented in that atmosphere. So our video guy, once again, he said, I can solve this. He went out to family entertainment centers around Chicago, and he took videos to show what a real arcade is like. We sent that back to the NBA to tell them this is what it's like, not Times Square. They accepted that, they understood, and they started talking deal terms with Roger Sharp.
Well, the logistics of getting all the players in our studio, and then the logistics of having them do every animation over and over and over again, because there was, a few hundred animations, and then the logistics of then going through and stripping out all those, it couldn't be done. Like, there's just no way.
Okay, all right, that's good.
We figured out a system for using an attachment system that games typically use for putting different types of guns or weapons or props in characters' hands.
And so Sean Liptak trimmed off a head and he pasted that head on. to prove that we could kind of change up a different, flesh tone, a different look.
There were 16 different head angles that we had to use. One looking forward, one looking up, one looking down, one looking left, one looking right, one looking left up, one looking left down, one looking left right, all the way around.
Eugene Jarvis always told me, make sure the player gets more powerful. Never take something away from him. Well, what if we, put the player into a mode where he's on fire and everything's a swish? And we knew right away that, there was a mechanic there that made sense.
And I was saying, oh, it's unrealistic. It's not, that's not cool. It's going to be fantasy then. People aren't going to take it seriously or whatever. And they're like, no, it's video game. It's totally video game. It's totally cool. It's totally cool. And I'm all like, it's not going to be cool at all. Nobody's going to like that.
He said, I won't give you the art. I won't give you flame art. And so I actually went back into Smash TV and took the, the flame explosions, attached them to the ball, and, we started the smoke mode and the on fire.
First time that we had seen in the arcade, and these kids who had been playing the game already for a couple weeks had seen, on fire and slamming and shattering the backboard. And the guy just went, ah, he raised his arms up in the air, oh, hell no, and ran around the arcade inside. He ran around 4 times. Everybody screamed. Everybody was like, ah, they're like holding their heads like they just saw like the second coming. And we were like looking at each other, we're like, oh my God. It's just such an iconic part of, and just felt so good to see people get that excited about something. We were like, yeah, I think it's gonna be pretty cool.
This is bad, man. This is bad.
We were getting calls about games that were broken. Said, what?
The game was supposedly down, and we says, what the heck's going on here? So you go out there, and you couldn't put any more quarters in the game.
It had accumulated so many quarters that had jammed the coin mech, and you couldn't put any more quarters in it.
Unheard of collections. At all of our test locations, NBA Jam is collecting between 124 and 167% of what Mortal Kombat did during its first 6 weeks.
Jurassic Park was the biggest film at the time, and it was breaking all kinds of earning records. It made $350 million, and that was a milestone that people said, we can't believe it. It's incomprehensible. And here comes NBA Jam, and Mark said, I said, can you tell me about how popular this really is? I can tell you this, NBA Jam made $1 billion. And I said, in quarters?
Anybody that just liked games and liked sports and walked around a mall would hear and see that game, because in malls they were like arcades and there was always groups of people around and they're like, what's that?
And when people are playing together, they're probably more likely to keep playing because you can't just walk off from your friend that you're playing with.
Whereas some games are abstract, or some people just don't want to blast aliens, or they don't want to fight other people. The idea of it's like basketball, but without all of those pesky rules, that becomes a very appealing thing to people that would be into sports but wouldn't be caught dead in an arcade. But here, this is the perfect gateway.
I got this speech 2 times from Neil at work. It was like, okay, you can do whatever you want, but it comes from these 3 choices: sports, driving, fighting, or gun. You can't do sports, you can't do driving, and you can't do fighting, so take your pick. So I guess we're doing another gun game. It was supposed to be Generation X with Public Enemy. That was the original concept, yeah. So 2 things happened. Number 1, we got a letter from, I believe it was Marvel, that said, we own Generation X, so back off. The second is Public Enemy would have nothing to do with us. So don't know why, but so we had to really okay, strike 1 and 2, so what are we gonna do now? So we changed the name to Revolution X, and we started thinking really hard about who we would have.
Our marketing person, Roger Sharp, God love him, said, Jack, how would you like to go out and speak with Aerosmith? What do you think of Aerosmith?
Aerosmith has always been one of those bands that was the most eager to take digital risks. They did a game for PC that was a virtual guitar early on. This is way before Guitar Hero, any of the other guitar abstraction music games. So when Revolution X became announced, all of my friends were like, wow, Aerosmith. I'm like, this is what they do. They were the risk takers. They thought digital entertainment was fun. That seemed like a perfect fit to me. Besides, I'm sure they looked at Journey back in the day and said, we could do that.
There were things I heard on the radio at that time that were dealing with the impact of music on youth culture and how it literally saved lives and gave meaning to every generation.
They can't go to their parents because their parents didn't grow up with computers. They don't know what's happening in the world or what's going to happen in the next 20 years. It's a real difficult time to grow up. But the one stable thing that has always kept kids sane is their music.
We did it. We wrapped up the videotapes, sent it to their management, and like a week later they called. They go, yeah, the band saw it. They love it. They want to do it. They're in. So we, we were like, what? They showed up. We had this big bus that they came from the airport in. Steven Tyler was the first guy off the bus. He had watched everything.
There's Steven Tyler up there, and George is just saying, all right, now do this and do that. I mean, they're just doing whatever we ask.
Excellent. Hey, come on in. You got your wings? Welcome home.
Yeah, we didn't have a drum set, because I remember the drummer had to air drum, and we said, we're going to build your drum set digitally. Remember where all your drums are. So, and he would play, because, I mean, he's a professional drummer, so he just... We had a whole looping session with the band. So we would take we took all the footage, and then we sent it to the sound department, and they brought up the footage.
This is all like combat stuff. I mean, heat of the battle kind of, no, stuff like that. So, pretty high energy level and that kind of yelling, stuff. About that long, too. Give me just 3 or 4 of them. No. That's great. Can you give me one that's really deep in your throat, like a no? That's cool. All right.
Awesome.
Excellent.
All right. Rock and roll.
I'm not going to say it. Okay, I'm sorry. What is that? That's just too much, huh?
They go like rock and roll. I mean, that's like, come on.
Okay. Fair enough.
These guys are maggots. They're putting chemicals in all our food.
Aerosmith looks like they had a half an hour to come in and sit down and go like, it's just like, yeah, all right. And then the keys fly out of the screen, or you get the videotape and put it in, and here's Steven Tyler's going like, you did good, now go do this. That stuff is so corny, but like kind of amazing.
It's a gun game, but what if the gun shot compact discs? And it's a crazy idea, I know. It makes little sense.
The sound of a CD launching like a grenade launcher. That is part of the core experience to me, and I can listen to that all day.
So much of the discussion of should it be Revolution X music as a weapon or Revolution X music, music as a weapon or music is the weapon. I think there was this humongous amount of email going backwards and forwards about whether it should be music as a weapon. What the hell? Who cares?
Unfortunately, people have come to use Revolution X as a punchline. I still unironically like it.
It doesn't match up to T2. It just didn't have the T2, who had so much momentum because of what it was, the movie, the robots. Revolution X was just kind of our sort of creation.
We had this thing where we were supposed to take a quarter every 45 seconds. That's what you were aiming to do with these arcade games. And NBA Jam and Mortal Kombat did that, actually. But most of the other games didn't. And you ended up having to try and make story games really, really difficult to be constantly taking money. Well, there's only so much difficulty that someone is going to do in order to play through it once. Because you played through it once and it cost you an arm and a leg, you don't want to do it again now.
But the game just didn't earn. I mean, it's all about the earnings. It always is about the cash box. How does the cash box, is it fill or it isn't fill? What's my return on investment? If I pay $4,000 or $5,000 for a game, I expect the operators are looking for their return on investment in 6 to 9 months.
We all realize that we bit off a lot in combining such major talent with a cinematic experience, and flying by the seat of our pants game design wasn't going to hack it in the future.
As video games are moving towards movies, this is definitely a step in the right direction. That's what I think is different. It's history, man. History in the making.
When I interviewed Ed and John about Mortal Kombat 3. We had already spoken a few times before, and I said, you know, you're on your third game, are you tired? And they actually did sound a little bit tired.
To some degree, we've become, you know, like a Mortal Kombat factory in the sense that, you know, we know exactly how to do the backgrounds, we know exactly how to do characters, we know how to do all the throws, the filming. It's just, we're just like in an assembly line mode. Right. So in that respect, we're kind of like, you know, you kind of wish you'd get a chance to do something completely different.
Apparently, there was at the time a pitch for a Star Wars game, and when we started talking about what that potential Star Wars game could be, on the record, they lit up. They were so happy, and I could tell these guys need their batteries recharged. They needed to shift gears out of Mortal Kombat to keep Mortal Kombat interesting for themselves. And I really believe that that's what The Grid became. The Grid was a 6-player competitive deathmatch game with completely different controls.
And then it had all these sensibilities that kind of came from Smash TV.
Good luck. You'll need it. You've got 2 minutes to get 5 points. Good luck.
It was trying to be this thing that was creating a sport out of this new kind of interface, a new kind of way to play. It had all the makings and the trimmings of what would be a big esport today, but all the way back in the 90s.
We'll get people here that it's like, hey, we're going to be on the grid all night. If anybody is saying we need to be off, let us know, just because we want to just grind out and play for 6 hours of the grid.
The Grid was Ed Boon having fun. He really did, he let it all out. He let himself do something different, and you could see that there's a joy in that game of him being able to shift gears and stretch a different part of his design brain. I always see it as sort of Ed Boon's vacation game that he worked so hard on that it was not a vacation at all.
We only sold 550 grids. It was approximately. There was nothing. Grid earned terribly as a single unit. If you had 4 or 6 units together, the problem there was, though, you got to buy 4 cabinets and 4 sets of electronics and everything else. So now, in order to get the earnings, what you're talking about, you had to invest, instead of X, you had to invest 4X.
You know, the operators expected every game that comes out has to earn, you know, so much money per week. There was no way that every game was going to come out and earn, you know, $2 grand a week. It just wasn't going to happen.
All management wanted to do was just, they wanted to stamp up. Basically, if they could have stamped out more Mortal Kombats, you know, like in a row, that's what they would have done.
We went to the well too many times with the same mechanics or not enough innovation.
But it was in the late 90s, I saw the warning signs that things may be getting more difficult in the coin-op area.
The consoles for the home get more sophisticated. The CD-ROM is a hugely important technology, right? And it brings that kind of arcade-style graphics into the home.
I could feel that what we could do as a company on the hardware side wasn't going to be able to approach that what a whole team of engineers could pull off.
Console gaming, you know, really changed how I felt about games because I was able to take my time. I was able to play games without like somebody looking over my shoulder and judging whether I was good or not. I was able to, you know, like experiment. You know, I was really happy when consoles came about because then there were games for me too. Whereas in the arcade, there was, you know, if I weren't good at Street Fighter, like the whole sort of experience kind of stopped at a certain level.
I think the other thing that had a huge impact was the internet. So the social aspect of the arcade, where that's where you would go and trash talk your buddy and friend, you could now find ways to do that playing your game, but also via the internet.
In fact, I remember an operator telling me once when the Monica Lewinsky conversation got published on the internet that he saw a decline in his audience. Like, it seems weird, but the internet became like this entertainment factor.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
And, you know, people stopped going to arcades.
So it was that period of time where, you know, you feel yourself being, you see your future, and your future looks crappy, and you feel somewhat paralyzed to actually make a change. I'd say that's probably the crappiest time.
You know, Neil basically had a meeting and he said, hey, I think the days are numbered for the coin-op business.
So the writing was on the wall. Things started falling apart very quickly, and you had this millions of dollars of overhead in coin-op, and it was decided, okay, we're going to get out of coin-op because there's so much more money theoretically to be made on consumer than there was on coin-op. And that was the end of coin-op. Pinball first, then came Midway, as far as coin-op was concerned.
Games were focused direct to consumer now, you know, Sony, et cetera. And it took all of the arcade mechanics out. It took the ways that we would percentage games, the way that we would bring a player through a game. Certainly, consumer development's a lot more complex and requires, you know, higher structure in a team and more team members. But that did change what Midway was for all those years in the 80s and 90s.
When you look at it sort of in the grand scheme of things, it was fairly short-lived. My career at Midway, you know, spanned, I think, a little bit longer than maybe a decade. And, you know, I experienced the rebirth, you know, and then the death of an industry.
You know, we had this great thing, and it was just kind of like the party was over. You know, it was just like, it's 2 a.m., you know, everybody's got a headache, and we had what a ride we had, you know, but they're closing up the disco, man. And you go home with a headache, and that was it.
There was just nothing like the experience of going into an arcade. It was like a dark cave filled with simulators that were like portals to other realities, like pilot a starship over here, or kill drug dealers over here, or be an NBA champion. You know, anything, any fantasy that you could have, you could go and put in a quarter and live out that fantasy.
Whenever you think of arcade style, an arcade style product, a fast-paced product, I think that was birthed by a lot of what we were producing.
You cannot plan that coalescing of the talent. It just, the way everybody came together, you know, that made all these games is so ridiculous. Nobody planned that. Nobody wrote on a piece of paper, now I need a Mark Trammell, now I need, you know, an Ed Boon type, now I need a, you know, Eugene Jarvis or whatever.
Remember who's creating these games? A guy from Michigan, a guy from California, a guy from Illinois. And as they're, you know, went through their life, playing all these different things, they said, you know, their brains are turning. Wouldn't it be interesting if you could do this? Wouldn't it be interesting if you could do that? Then these guys grow up and they come knocking on the door, they get a job working for a company like Midway or Williams, and somebody says to them, okay, what's your idea? Oh, I got this brilliant idea. I want to do this. Okay.